Alex, nice to see you, and thanks for opening your house to the Fun and Serious Game Festival. I was telling the audience that you have made a lot of games that I have played because I'm an old man, and their parents probably have played themselves as well.
Yes, it's a completely different audience these days. I could definitely cope with parents of people that I meet rather than the actual people themselves. No, thank you very much for having us along. I'd like to welcome you back to our kids' bedroom. Uh, but yeah, it's very nice to be able to come and do these sorts of things. Love doing it.
I leave the stage to you, and con todos vosotros, Alex Trowers.
So I shall just do a quick share of this. Here we go. Right, so I can't see or hear any of you, so this may be a little bit weird, but we'll give it a go anyway. First of all, this talk is entitled How is Greater Than Why? And it's a talk about game designers by me. I'm very old. So first of all, a little bit about me. I've been designing games professionally for 31 years now. In that time, I've worked for a whole bunch of companies, many companies. There's a list of a few of them. So I started off with Bullfrog back in the 90s, where we did a load of games that, yeah, your parents may have heard of, through Electronic Arts, Lost Toys, Kuju, Black Rock, some mobile stuff with Boss Alien, and currently I'm at a studio called Splash Damage in the south of England. But I've also been a full indie, and by that I mean like a micro studio. It was just myself and Leanne. We were doing our own thing, just the two of us, and worrying about how we were going to pay rent for most of the time. So as you can see, I've pretty much run the gamut there of things you can do and the styles in this industry. You can follow me on Twitter at BotPaint. Feel free to hit me up with any and all questions you may have, and there will be some. So anyway, so the main premise of this is when people find out what it is that I do for a living, most of the time, the next thing that comes out of their mouths is, I've got a great idea for a game. And even though I can't see it, if I asked for a show of hands for all of those who've got a great idea for a game, I'm willing to bet that more than 50% of you stick your hands up. And sadly, the truth is, no, you don't. You don't have a good idea for a game. Thank you very much for having me. Like I said, you can follow me. No, that's not right. So the problem is that when people say they've got a great idea for a game, they haven't really thought it through. And 9 times out of 10, what's happening is they've got a great idea for the narrative of the game, the backstory or the plot or the characters. Normally it's for, well, it depends in which sort of era you pitch this game at me. Normally it's for either a first-person shooter, or there was a point where it was a third-person action adventure, and then there was a point when it was a 2.5D platformer in the style of Ori and the Blind Forest. And those are literally the only pitches I heard was, it's that, but the main character is a something. He's a space marine, or he's a zombie, or he's a zombie space marine. And none of it is about what you do in the game or how any of it works. Okay. Now, part of the problem is that there are many different definitions of what a game is. Everybody's got their own. Everybody thinks that game means something different. And to this point, we still haven't ever come up with sort of more classification for it. And that's okay too. A game can be anything to anyone. But what I want to talk about then is, as a game designer, what that actually means. Well, first of all, there's loads of different types of game designer. You've got systems designers, tech designers, narrative designers, level designers, and now you've got UX designers. By that we mean user experience, what the player actually gets to do, how the player interfaces with the whole rest of the game. Apologies to those of you who are already veteran game designers. This one is predominantly for students, but you may find it useful to see how it works in loads of different places. You'll notice by looking at those at that list, not one of those is the ideas guy. There is no such thing as an ideas guy. Or there is, but you need a stupid amount of money or to have been doing this for so long that you can become the ideas guy. To give you an idea, I've been doing this a very long time. I'm still not the ideas guy. So if you're going into this thinking that's the person you want to be, again, you're not going to be able to do it. So what do each of these sort of specializations do? Now, don't get me wrong. Back in the day, a designer was a designer, and you know what? You did a bit of all of these things. You would build the levels at the same time that you were defining the systems and speccing out the tools that you needed to be able to build them, whilst coming up with the story and the interface. Okay, you did all of those. But as teams get bigger and the technology advances, everybody started to specialize. The same is true of graphic artists in the industry. Back then, you put pixels on screens and that was it. But now you've got riggers, animators, tech artists, texture artists, modelers, and everybody's kind of specialized into their own little field. And the same is true in design. So just quickly, the systems guy establishes how the gameplay mechanics work. This is how you reload a weapon, or how the accuracy works whenever you pull the trigger, or the way that we balance the economy, or the way that, it's all of those things under the hood that is how the game actually works. And if I was to pick any one of these specializations to be in, that would be my probably my favorite one of the lot. Okay, I've done all of these things, but that one is probably the one that I'm most interested in. The tech narrative is predominantly to do with implementing all of the stuff in the game, actually editing the values within the game itself, defining the tools that the team is going to need and how they work, even potentially building the tools themselves. The narrative designer, it isn't the guy who makes the story, that's the writer. The narrative designer deals with how we deliver that narrative, how we deliver the story to you. We'll build out essentially conversation trees, perhaps. If that's the kind of thing that you're doing in your game, they will be responsible for everything like that. Or indeed, just picking out of all of the phrases that you have, which ones this character is likely to say at any given point in time. Narrative designer. Level designer, fairly self-explanatory. They build the worlds, the arenas, the maps that this whole game takes place on. And they could be corridors, they could be open world, they could be all sorts of stuff. They populate the world with interesting stuff for you, the player, to do. And UX is mainly an interface with the UI guys, telling them what buttons you want, where you want them, and why moving from this screen to this next screen makes sense the way it does. But the job of all of these game designers is to make the player feel. Now, I don't care what you make the player feel, but you've got to make them feel something. Your remit could be to make them feel enjoyment. It could be make them feel sad or scared or any number of things. And each one of those facets of game design speaks towards making the player feel something. They're going to have an experience, and they're going to be able to recount that experience. And hopefully they're going to think that was an amazing experience. I really, really liked it. I felt powerful. I felt tiny. I felt scared. I felt whatever. Whatever you want them to feel, and that's how you do it. Oh, sorry, that's your aim here, is to make them feel something for your game. So you'll almost never, although this will contradict the slide I'm about to put up later, you'll almost never be doing this in isolation. Most of the time, you're going to be taking questions from the team. And your role on a team, broadly speaking, and again, depending on the specialization, will be to answer the questions that they have. The team will consist of programmers, it will consist of artists, and they're all going to be kind of looking to you, the designers or the design department, to say, this is what we're trying to do. This is how the game works, okay? So the main thing you have to answer is literally how. How should this work? Well, I think it should be able to do this, and I think it should be able to do that. And I think this system should work this way, and we should have, we should have health pickups, should we? Okay, why are we going to have health pickups? Well, we're going to need health pickups because players are going to take damage, and pickups is an interesting way to force people to explore around the map, or any number of justifications for doing it. We want to do that. That's the decision. This is how it works. Oh, so we're going to need a health bar, and we're going to need a health value, and presumably we're going to need some kind of damage model. So how should the damage model work? And you extrapolate from there. Are we going to be able to jump? Well, we probably don't want to jump, because if we make it so that you can jump, then we're going to be potentially getting into loads of edge cases where you fall through the map, or they're going to get into areas we don't want them to get into, or glitch things. So I tell you what, let's say no jumps, but this is the reason why we're not having jumps. So yeah, you're the people that they're going to come to say, what is it that we're building? How are we actually gonna do that? And if you're the guy who has just gone, you're a Space Marine zombie, you're not going to have those answers. So you need to be thinking about that. All of this requires communication. If there's one skill you need as a designer, it is to be able to communicate the idea that's bouncing around in your head to the people who are actually going to enable this thing to happen. It's the most important thing. And not only is it sort of a communication skill, but it's a sales pitch as well. You may think this is the best thing, the best system ever, the best idea ever, but you've got to be able to convince them that A, this is a good idea to do, and B, this is how you do it. Communication is key. With that in mind, it's you'll hear this a lot, this adage, show, don't tell, okay? You can write the best doc ever, the best documentation ever that says the game is going to do this, and it's going to be amazing for these reasons. But that pales into insignificance compared with actually showing them what you mean. Get them to play the game. Get them to play something similar to it. Get them to play a prototype. If you've got one mechanic that you're working on, and maybe it's a little tricky to explain, make a prototype of it. Show how it works. Get them to experience it. And just the very act of sticking that in somebody else's hands will give you a much, much better idea of whether it was a good idea in the first place or not. It is invaluable having that sort of back and forth with somebody else without them even knowing. They won't even know that they're doing it, but you'll watch them play it and you'll go, oh, that's interesting. The way that they did that, I hadn't catered for that. So maybe I need to build something in that stops them being able to do that. Or maybe that's a really cool feature and we need to double down on that. So maybe we need to find other ways of incorporating it. Either way, you can only get that by somebody actually experiencing it, which they can't do from a piece of paper. So all of this is there's one aim in all of this, right? And that is to make a good game. Now, obviously, like I said before, the question of what a game is very, very subjective, but it still follows the same kind of, whatever sort of game you're trying to make, there are a number of things that you can do that will increase the chances of this thing being a success. What we mean by success can be wildly different. It can be commercial. This thing's made a lot of money. That's a totally different set of things that you have to follow to, or sometimes follow to make this fun to play, make it be a critically acclaimed game. The first thing is, obviously, this gets a lot easier with experience. And I don't necessarily mean longevity or anything like that. What I mean is other games have done this first, or other things have done this first. It is very, very, very unlikely that you're going to come up with a completely new system, and that's perfectly fine. So having a broad enough experience that you can reference the bits you need from other games is a fantastic starting point, okay? So you might take, for instance, let's look at the active reload from Gears. That was an interesting system. That was really, really cool. Why don't we start with that? Right, how can we iterate on that? How can we make that better? That's our baseline. That's what we want to do. But then we don't just want to copy it. That's where we're starting. And we're going to go from there. We're going to try out a few more things. What if you get multiple shots at landing that extra reload? What if there was an even larger penalty for failing to get it? What if this was an entirely opt-in system? What if there's so many what ifs? But having that level of experience gives you a very, very good place to start. It's very important, though, that it's not just games. This inspiration, this baseline thing can and should come from anywhere. It's quite frustrating seeing a lot of people just like, oh, I'm a designer because I play a whole load of games and that's all I care about. You need to be reading books and watching films and going outside and just seeing how the world works. You need to know about how parabolic curves work in space. You want to read up about NASA missions, or you want to find out about how whales breed in the ocean, or any number of these other things can and should be a huge influence on the ideas that you're having. Because if a game hasn't done it first, then there's a very good chance that nature or the outside world has. And again, it's a great starting point. Game jams as well. So if you're not already part of a team, or it's something you're looking, if this is something that you're looking to get into, find yourself a couple of like-minded individuals and hit up a game jam. They are fantastic ways of experiencing what it's like in the games industry, or what it's like on a game project in microcosm. And it's got everything from how you work together with the team to a ridiculously tight deadline and almost no sleep, right? It's very, very representative of of poorly run projects in the full industry. But they're also super inspiring. You will meet some great people there. And who knows, any one of that's the start of your old boys network. Any one of those people could go on to become the next Shigeru Miyamoto, right? And you know what? They're your best mate, and suddenly you've got a job working at their studio, or you founded this studio together, and we're off to the races. Game jams, socialize with them, use them to experiment, use them to have fun and express yourself in the games you want to make. With that in mind, if you're already on a team or something like that, then prototyping. Prototyping is a hugely important tool to making a decent game. Again, there's going to be a lot of stuff where you're not going to know if something's going to be fun or not. You've got this idea and it might be fun, but until you actually get a controller in somebody's hand and see them playing it, you don't know. So the best way of doing that, certainly these days, with just the sheer amount of cost involved in making a game, is to prototype something, to just bash something together quickly and see if that aspect works. It's very important when you're making a prototype that you focus on this one area that it is you want to do. You can't get distracted with trying to make this thing into the whole game. Just focus on this one tiny little bit of it and get that polished and get that working really, really nicely. And it is also very, very important to, I mean, you're going to get it wrong. There are going to be many things that just straight up don't work. And the quicker you can get to that point, the better. Now, this means that not every prototype will be a success, but a failure of a prototype, if it proves that the thing doesn't work, that's still a success. It's still a result, okay? It's not the result you were after, not the result you were hoping for, but it's still very, very useful. And it means that you didn't waste any of the main team resources in reaching this decision. Because believe you me, it's a lot harder to recover from that than it is from a prototype just being not that good. And obviously, again, along with game being different to everyone, what constitutes a development team is different for everyone. You've got everything from the AAA large studios to the indie small studios and all point in between. And annoyingly, there's quite a division. There can be quite some sort of divisive comments made by people in large studios about indie people are just playing at this, they should go away, and indie people going, well, the large studios, they're just all corporate, it's not worth it, la 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 la. And both are kind of right. And again, it's just down to your personal preference. Not one is better than the other. They've all got advantages and disadvantages. What it's like working in a large studio, you're going to find you've got less ownership over this thing that you're making. Whatever the game is that you're making, it's not necessarily going to be yours. It's going to be your teams or your companies, right? You're going to be a much smaller cog in a much bigger machine. That's okay too, because you know what? It's collaborative. It's a lot more collaborative. Working as part of a team is a lot of fun, And what you give up in the kind of the ownership of the entirety of the idea, you more than make up for with the creative collaboration. You will never have all of the best ideas on your own. That's just a fact. You ask anybody, even the very best game directors of the age will agree that they're not the ones coming up with all of their ideas. You've got to surround yourself with other people who can feed in these other ideas as well, right? And it would be incredibly arrogant to think I'm the only one who's going to have any good ideas on this team. So that's always really, really fascinating. It enables you to specialize a lot more because somebody else can be picking up the other aspects that maybe you're not that interested in. So you will specialize in one of those other areas. If you just want to make maps or scenarios to become a level designer, that's fine too. And don't worry about the other stuff. There'll be somebody else on the team to do it. There's always going to be compromise. There's always going to have to be, oh, I want it to do this. And then somebody else says, but I want it to do that. And you might not be able to do them both at the same time, or there's no way for them to work together. So you have to come up with a different solution. So there's going to be compromise. But it is super important that it's not this design by committee thing. Now, the example I always use for this is somebody says it's going to be red and somebody says it's going to be blue and you can't separate them. Then for the love of God, don't make it magenta. Nobody is after magenta. Make it blue or make it red or make it slightly a reddy blue or a bluey red, but don't just go straight down the middle. Pick one of them for a number of reasons, but that's the direction you go, and get everybody on board and you travel in that one direction. But don't just make it this sort of amalgam of all of the things, because you'll just end up with a mess. The other advantage of working in a large studio is security. I know it doesn't seem like it, but we're always hearing about layoffs and what have you, but believe you me, it's still a lot more secure having this regular paycheck coming in than it is if you were out there doing it on your own. In a small studio, you've got more ownership. It's your game. You know, you decide what it is that you're going to make. Nobody further up the chain has come and said, right, today we're going to work on this project, or the publisher wants us to do this, or we've just signed an IP deal for that. It's whatever you want to make. And that comes with its own caveat, is that if this game fails, it fails because you did. There's no one else to blame. You can't hide behind somebody else. It's you. You did it. There was something that you got wrong that caused this thing to go wrong, right? And that's, I mean, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of fun, a lot of responsibility, but oh boy, that's entertaining. You also will find yourself having to wear many hats. It is unlikely that you'll have one person to do any one of the specialized jobs, so you have to do it yourself. And there's a whole load of jobs that you've got to do that you won't think that you have to do, and it's very and that you don't even want to do. Key of which is marketing. The biggest death knell for so many indie studios is they work on this game, they make this game, and they've got a brilliant game, and it could be the best game in the world, but nobody's ever heard of it. And just tweeting about it to your friends when you're ready to launch, that's not marketing, right? I can't talk to you with any great authority on marketing, but there are many people who can. But suffice to say that marketing is super important, and you won't even, it's not the thing that's on most sort of game developers' radar, certainly not indies. And then you've got the concept of variable income. You're not always going to be earning money. The concept of full indie, i.e. this is the only thing you're doing to generate income, is incredibly scary. I would much more recommend do this thing as a side project. I mean, the problem with that is you've got to worry about the contract you've got with whoever's employing you, but have some other source of income. Please do that. Otherwise it's an incredibly big risk, and it is heartbreaking when it doesn't work out for you. So, you know, there they go. It's horses for courses. There's no one that's better than the other. You can probably make bigger games in a AAA studio, but you've probably got much more innovation happening in as an indie studio, and fewer meetings. That's always a good thing. So I'll just wrap up now. Sorry if it's been a bit of a blast, but I'll just wrap up now with a couple of general tips about game design specifically. The first is never say never. I hate game designs that say never let the player do this. There'll always be an edge case, or there'll always be an exception where you're like, oh, but hang on, actually it would be really cool to be able to do that in this situation. So I would try avoiding saying the player will never do this thing, or we don't want the player to ever do this. Instead, to say, for the most part, we're not going to let him do this, but there's this really cool bit in chapter 3 where we need him to do this, which is that, so we're going to let him do it. The same also obviously applies to always. The player should always be able to, no, not necessarily. I can definitely think of reasons why we wouldn't always want to be able to do that thing. It would be really nice to, I mean, don't get me wrong, don't go full black and white and suddenly take the creature away, right? But, you know, along those lines, it's always nice to sort of mix it up. This is a funny one, like encouraging people to be two-faced. What I actually mean about that is internally and externally. So externally, I'm talking to somebody else about our project. I'm always selling it. This project is amazing. It's got the best features. It's got the best team. Everything is brilliant. You're going to love it. I can't do that internally. Internally, with the rest of the team, we've got to be able to objectively be honest about the game. Oh, actually, you know what? That bit's not very good. We need to fix that. We need to make sure that that is the best thing ever. But outside, we'll be like, no, it is. It's the best thing ever. Inside, well, no, look, we really need to work a bit more on that, right? Otherwise, you're just going to, if you start drinking your own Kool-Aid, the project is doomed. With that in mind, though, you can't just say, that's not very good. You've got to be able to say, I don't like that. And I don't like that for these reasons. By the way, here's some suggestions about how we might try and fix that. You know, you've got to be able to you've got to be able to do this positively, and you've got to be able to be respectful of other people's opinions and what they might think about you, telling them that you don't like their work, right? So it's very, very important to play that kind of, to be very considerate and be very respectful of the stuff that they've done, and work with them to make it even better. It's always got to be positive, additive. Always be playing stuff. Does this really need to be explained? You need to be playing, right? Everything is a game. Game development is a game. Your team should be having fun. You can tell when they're having fun, that's when the labors of love, that's when the attention to detail, the tiny little bits that go into the game, that you can always tell. The end user will always be able to tell that whoever made this game, they loved it. They loved it with their soul, because they didn't need to do that thing, but they spent the extra time to do it. And that, yeah, that is key, right? So you've always got to respect the culture, get everybody having fun, and pay attention to the little stuff to make it that extra 10% on the game that will make you just the best game ever. Anyway, I hope that was all right. Thank you very much for that. Like I said, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm @paint. And obviously I will be shilling for splash damage. If you are looking for work, we are looking for people, so feel free to hit us up. But yes, thank you very much for your time.